Hello, everybody. Anna Sabramowitz here, and I have a fabulous guest for you today, Lynn O'Reilly. She is, I got to make sure I got this right because this is awesome. She's the Director of Digital Learning at University of British Columbia, Sauder Executive Education. Did I say Sauder right?
Yes, you did.
Awesome. Okay, and I'm going to read some of the interests and specialties that Lynn holds. So design thinking, strategic thinking, instructional design, adult learning principles, learning experience design, educational technology, lifelong learning, leadership EQ, agile project management, substantive editing, creative writing, downhill skiing, and adventure motorcycling. That's awesome. That's a wicked combo. Now, the thing that kind of piqued my interest is, what is substantive editing?
Essentially, that's when you're looking at the project as a whole and you're making sure that the content flows well and you are making suggestions. You're helping the writer develop a story. So the difference would be if you were copy editing, for example, you would be looking at the specific pieces, the spelling, the grammar, the mechanics of the writing. Yeah. So substantive editing is a little bit of that, but then taking it up a level and looking at the content as a whole.
Oh, interesting. Cool. I learned something new today. Thank you. And welcome. Thanks for doing this interview. This is so awesome. I'm excited for people to learn more about you.
Yeah.
So cool. And share your wisdom with us.
Ooh.
Okay.
I'll have to see if I can find some.
We'll dig it up. I know it's early.
Yeah.
Okay, so how did you get into this online learning profession? Tell me your story. What drives you? What gets you up in the morning?
Oh,
Other than coffee.
Other than coffee, yeah. Okay, what got me into this? So I was working as an editor. I was an editor for a publishing company, a small publishing company. Initially, I started in Japan. Went over there right out of university, ended up doing some copy editing or proofing and worked up to substantive editing in research articles. So I was actually teaching myself how to be an editor as I was editing, which was an interesting time. I kind of fell into a lot of my jobs when I was younger. While I was in Japan, I was then asked to do a 2-week, what do you call it, substitute teaching role for an international school. And that 2 weeks turned into, at that time, 3 years. And then I was asked very gently if I could please go and get my teaching certificate because I was working without one. And so at that point, I started looking around and I thought, I should be furthering my education. What can I do? I was in Japan. We had a young daughter. She was 5 or 6 at the time. And I thought, I can't go back and to either Canada or the States and take one of these, classes, these programs that would take me a year to get my teaching certificate.
Yeah.
At that time, we weren't ready to move back to Japan or back to Canada. So anyway, I started looking around and I realized that the only thing that I could do online would be a master's. And so at that time, it was fairly new. Your online experience was really just text-based and it was very email focused. But I started looking into it and I found this program at Athabasca University that was about developing, it was adult education, master's in adult ed, but specifically for what they called at that time distance ed, so designing distance education programs. And so that's how I ended up there.
Athabasca is a pioneer, I think, in this realm. And I've also heard amazing just amazing feedback about their cohorts. And to be honest with you, every single person who I've met that has completed an Athabasca Master's is pro. So
well, that's good to know.
Yeah, like, hey, that's me.
Well, there could be an exception to that rule.
There always is.
There always is.
Not in this case.
No, I enjoyed it. I Yeah, I learned a lot. Some of what I learned was what I wouldn't do in an online environment, which is always interesting.
Yeah.
But no, it was great, and I think for me, where I was in Japan at the time, the ability to connect with people, even though it was in a virtual environment, we didn't have what we have now, the face-to-face or screen-to-face, if you will, aspect of it to that extent. And I think Messenger was just coming out at that time, so there was this idea. But the asynchronous approach to it was really good for me. I need time to process.
Yeah,
so it was a good opportunity.
Cool. Okay, so you didn't answer what gets you up in the morning. Why are you still doing this? Why are you still passionate about it?
Well, yeah, that's a good question. I love the challenge. I love the fact that you're never finished, you're never done. I talk to our team here, and we work on things, and I say, we're using a project management approach, but we're not closing this project. We will never finish it. So we've adapted the project management terminology for our work here, because we're always looking at how we can improve, how we can incorporate. We look at it as phase 1, phase 2, phase 3. So that's what gets me up in the morning. I have to balance that with also, okay, it's good enough, just get it out there as well. But it's the challenge, it's the excitement, it's the people I work with, it's the idea that there's always more to do.
Yeah, that's true. And the tech's always evolving, and you always have to keep on pushing back.
Exactly.
Do I want those VR glasses yet? Oh.
Yeah. Can I use them?
Yeah, that's right. Anyways, I have some fun stories about VR glasses, but so our audience, I think primarily is like the people that I know that tune in. They're either just getting into this and they're brand spanking new, or they're people who potentially have been like the trainer for years. All of a sudden their organization has heavily invested in a learning management system, e-learning, and they're just freaking out a little bit, like, whoa, new world. What kind of advice would you have for those people as far as how do you get started? What's the kind of advice you would have maybe given yourself when you were just first starting out and getting into this world?
That's a big question. First and foremost, I'd preface this by saying I don't know that I'm giving advice. I would make suggestions. I don't know whether I'm the person to come to for advice. I think you look hard at what environment you want to be doing this in. So I try to simplify some of these things for myself, and I say, okay, am I going to be in a corporate training environment, or would I prefer to be in that more academic, organizational, or large organizational environment? Because I believe they both have their opportunities and their challenges. But there are a number of differences in the style of learning when it comes to learning design and instructional design. So I think that's one of the things you would really try to look at focusing on. I do believe it's hard to go back and forth when you're first in this, or to think about doing it all when you're in this. So if an organization, if an academic institution comes to you and says, we want you to help create this, that's a different piece than if a corporate environment TELUS comes to you and says, listen, we need so many people and we want to, or we have so many people and we want to onboard them. Can you help us do this? There's a very different learning design approach to those. But no matter what field or industry you go into, you have to know your audience. So who are you creating this for? And if you don't keep that learner front and center in this, then you have no idea what you're doing. It really will go off target pretty quickly. You'll lose track of why you're working on the project. Another thing I'd say is just always be curious. Your job as an instructional designer is to ask why. Why am I doing this? And I've learned over the years, I actually apply what I call I don't call it, it is the Stephen Covey approach. Start with the end in mind. So always look at what is it that this organization or this individual, whoever you're working for, needs to get out of this. What is it that the learner needs to get out of this? And it's not just the learner, because you're actually working with that organization or that business. And so the learning has to align with their business objectives. And so they may be creating this for another learner. And so you actually, as an instructional designer, you have two learners in your head. But once you look at those objectives and you understand those business objectives and you're on the same wavelength with your client, then the rest tends to fall into place as you go through.
So it's kind of weird because your role, I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, but you've from servicing students in this academic realm to then now this school of business. Are you, like, one of the things that I've always found a challenge in, because I do flip-flop between the two, that the audience is very more clearly defined, because you're like, okay, here's what they need to do, and it's usually an employee base. But with students, it's like it's so much different to say what do they want, because it's almost like you're starting with the product instead of starting with the end user. Do you know what I mean?
I think so. Keeping in mind that my role, I'm working in the professional development area. And so I'm not, we like to look at ourselves more as an entrepreneurial aspect or a part of the Slaughter School of Business. We do have an opportunity to work with students, if you will, but we tend to call them learners and participants. It's an adult learning focus that we're using here. I have never worked in an undergrad environment. So I've always been in the adult learning or the professional development side of the university.
Oh, that's awesome, actually. Because the other side is so ambiguous. Like, you just basically generate a product and say, I hope this sticks. I hope people like it.
Yeah, exactly. Well, and I mean, my understanding of it is that it can be a very templated approach. And that doesn't get me up in the morning. That's not what drives me. So I like the creative side of the professional development. I like the idea of being able to work as part of a team to develop these learning assets, as we're calling them now, these pieces that will go together. And, for one style or one piece of learning, it may be that we use this foundational piece and we add this and this and this, and then we take that same foundational piece over here, but we add this and this and this. And so I like that change, that idea of always evolving and always changing the learning.
I really like that you said that, because the fact that, consider where you are going as an instructional designer, corporate and academic, and then there's this idea that it's almost like you are, you can be more creative and innovative with the adult side, because that's what people expect. They expect cutting edge. They expect engaging and contextual things, right? Mm-hmm. So but like you're absolutely right. In higher ed, undergrad, it's very following protocols and templates is very important. So if you're that kind of person, then now you kind of know where to go. So,
exactly. Yeah. And it could just be a matter of looking at somewhat maybe not in all areas, but in some of the university undergraduate area, it's more of a traditional approach. And so there will be more of a textbook. They've got a longer, what I find is very differentiating is that the learners have already got their mindset into how much time it's going to take to learn this, right? They've got a longer time frame. Some of these courses that they're doing may be 13 weeks long. in terms of professional development and adult learning, what are we doing? We're going the opposite. We're saying, how can we make this shorter? How can we get this to people faster and make it so that it's bite-sized and they don't have to spend, now they're saying, I don't want to spend 2 days in a classroom. I don't want to spend a day and a half, in a blended learning environment. And so we're constantly fighting that time.
So that's actually a really cool point. So basically what you're because of your extreme time constraints, you're probably saying, how can I, which is a beautiful thing, how can I deliver the most value to these people in this short amount of time?
Mm-hmm.
If we did that with traditional education, that would also be awesome. Maybe they'll get there one day. Yeah, I know. It just makes you look good.
Can't get as much money from going.
So true. So to be in this role as what do you think are like some fundamental knowledge or skills and attitude that you need that are essential? You've mentioned some already.
Yeah, and for me, I came upon the idea that I was a 3-legged stool, if you will. Maybe that's not a good image, but think of you're working with a SME. So in order to be comfortable on that stool, you have to have all 3 legs. But for me, there's the writing and editing. You need to know what is good content. And if you get content that is not engaging, then how can you help to make it more engaging? And the adage that content is king. Well, yes, maybe it is still. That's where we really do. We're absorbing more of it or digesting more of it. So if it's, how many of us look at a website and if we're not engaged in the first few seconds, we're off of it. So really know what good writing is. And you write for your audience. That's the other thing. You need to be able to change that style. So if your SME is not able, if your SME is a very academic writer or a very business academic type writing, then you need to be able to maybe massage that or help them massage that a little bit as an editor, not as a person who writes it for them, but as an editor. The second thing I think is you need to be a coach, and that's where your SME or your content developer, they own that writing initially, and so your role is to coach them. So I run into kind of the extremes. The person that says they know all and they're just going to do it their way, come hell or high water, and then there's the other person that hits that blank wall. They don't realize they're all keen initially, and then they get into it and they realize how much work it is, or they realize that all of this stuff in their head, and they feel that it needs to all be in the course, and how are they going to do that? So your role is to actually help them put that into, set the parameters for it so that we know exactly what we need, and you can help them get there. You don't have to write it for them, but you need to coach them in how to get it from their head onto the paper or whatever you're using. And then the third leg of the stool is you need to know enough about the technology to be dangerous. And so if you can be comfortable in those 3 areas, so writing and editing, coaching, and technology, and the use of technology, I think you're well on your way.
Cool. Good advice. Those are solid. That idea of coaching, I think it's underdeveloped, we focus a lot on the technology, and even the writing is kind of lessened. Mm-hmm. The technology, the implementation, those things are kind of, there's a lot of buzz around that, but to actually develop human relationships to help that person basically pull that stuff out, that to me is almost, it's not stressed as much as it should be. So so that's amazing advice. I
ask why. Always go to why.
Yeah.
Why are we doing this? Why are you saying that? What do you mean by that? The 3 W's are good.
Yeah. Yeah. I go all the way to 5.
Do you?
Yes, I do.
Wow. You always were an overachiever, though.
Yeah, I guess you're right. But it's funny. I actually was talking to somebody yesterday about the 5 whys, and I was doing these contextual interviews with subject matter experts, and there was the subject matter expert there, and my peer, who was also an instructional designer, sitting across from me, and they would tell me something, and I'd go, "Why?" And then I'd go, "Why?" again, and at the 3rd why, the person would just, like, the other ID would look at me and be like. and because they notice that stuff, but the SME's like, oh, and then right, because they want to talk about their stuff and they want to give you all the details if you just listen. So the whys have worked very well for me, and I actually didn't learn them until I think a little late. I could have had much more. I just had these lessons earlier. So if you're watching today, why is important.
Well, why? But you mentioned in another video that I saw of yours about recording, and if the SME is open to being recorded, that's a valuable technique, because we miss so much. I mean, one of the things that we are hoping to learn more about in this area is how to listen. So, when you are in that initial meeting with the SME and they're talking, some of us, we can be jumping ahead to, we want to ask why, but we're not really listening to some. So there are nuggets in there. So I think the recording is a valuable piece as well.
You're right. In fact, I remember I'm going through a process now where I've been through interviews, and I will listen to them several times and catch new nuances every time, especially if you're designing something like if I'm doing, scenarios, it's details. It's fabulous. So the recording option, and actually most people, I find, like, if I just tell them straight up, I'm like, I'm just going to listen to you and I don't want to have to focus on typing.
Yes.
Do you like, I'll destroy it afterwards, but exactly. You will not be incriminated. May I use your non-attributed comments?
I think we're getting used to being recorded in all aspects of life.
We already are. I mean, just don't deny it. You got a webcam, you're recorded. Yeah. So this has come up quite a lot lately, and I wanted to ask you about it because I find, after my interactions with you, I think you're a very open and confident person and professional, and so I think that there's a lot of people out there who have the skills in, like, they're dangerous with the technology. They can they have technical writing. They can put together beautiful materials, but then when it comes to actually either delivering their product or asking somebody, let's say, who's in a senior position, who's their subject matter expert, they just freak out. They don't have the confidence. So how do you build confidence?
Well, thank you for that. I don't always feel confident, just so you know. It's all a facade. But it is, acting lessons have been great. The thing I have done and I continue to do is I read and read and read as much as I can. But then I realize I can't just continuously read. I actually stop and do. And so, you read about, whether you're looking at learning theory or you're looking at, the new technology coming out, read about it, but then stop and apply it, because what we do in life is we apply our learning. So you have to be doing that as an instructional designer. You can't always be just telling people what to do. You actually have to be doing that kind of learning yourself, because it's the experiential learning that will really, I think, cement it and really help you become better. I do try to go to as many events, and whether it's a webinar or a face-to-face event, I try to go, because believe it or not, I'm not comfortable with small talk in a large event. I don't do well in those things. At least I don't. I'm not comfortable in that. So I really do force myself to get out there and have conversations with people. It's amazing what you can learn when you have a conversation. And then I try to make time in the work day or in the work week to practice what you preach. So we're creating learning pieces. I actually take time to do some teaching as well within our own environment, or coaching, or whatever you want to call it. I work with my colleagues, and I help them to become better, more knowledgeable about things like instructional design, things like adult learning, and things like the use of technology. Like, it's not just about the tools, and why is that? And so we have little lunch and learns. And so I find, that teaching side of it, or that instructional side of it, sometimes it's facilitating. That's been great, because in the online world, and when you're creating instructional pieces, it's different from the face-to-face world. Obviously, in the face-to-face world, when you've been up in front of a class of learners, and you say something, or you take them through something, and you look at them, and you've got that blank look in their face, then you, as a seasoned professional, you reach into your bag of teaching tricks, and you pull out a different way of explaining that, or you work it, you massage it a little bit in front of them. In the online world, you have to anticipate those glazed over looks, 4 months in advance. And so you have to be, and that's where you are the learner. So it helps if, as you are creating these pieces, if you can actually teach them to a face-to-face audience as well. And so you combine the best of both worlds, right? I'm creating instructional pieces that are going to be online, but I'm actually going to teach these in my environment, my safe environment, with my colleagues, or my family. Maybe Mr. Darcy wants to learn something about adult learning. So
not a human.
Not a human. Yeah, sorry, your dog. So that's what I like to suggest, is that you actually you work it out a little bit.
I really liked what you said about the idea of almost I think the teaching other people, even if you're just trying to build your confidence to just be able to share information confidently, start with things that you know,
Mm-hmm.
and help others, right? I think that's that part of I think the almost sometimes the lack of confidence is because we look so internally. We're so focused on how we're going to look and feel. But if you're just focusing on helping somebody else do a better job, then that mental thing, there's a shift. You stop thinking about how you feel, right?
Yeah, that's a good way to put it.
It drifts
really
away.
Yeah,
but I really
exactly.
like that. And what I love is the idea of, let's say, because this has always been a huge challenge for online courses for undergrad, is group work, right?
Yeah.
Students, and they hate it with a vengeance. They'll look
Yes.
at the course outline, and if there's a group work on it, they'll email the instructor and say, "Hey, do we really need to be
Exactly.
Is this essential?" So
Yeah.
so one of the things I'm thinking is to work out some of those kinks, is we actually run those innovative new group work strategies in live facilitated classes first.
Yeah.
That would be really cool. Yeah.
And just at a lunch and learn. I mean, just
nothing crazy.
You don't have to set out a whole lesson around this or anything like that.
Yeah, but you're right. The blank look, you don't get it, and somebody is there by themselves. The other thing, like you said about language, is that in an online environment, it's every single word matters.
Yeah,
and it's scrutinized.
Yeah.
To the highest degree.
Yeah.
So it needs to be really good.
Yeah, that made me think about that idea about feedback. I mean, we're notoriously bad at giving and receiving feedback, and so start developing that ability to receive the feedback as well. So get people to really look at what you're doing and say, is it working for you? What could make it better? What could improve this?
Yeah, that is a part of that dropping the ego too. Totally. A lot of people say they're like, I'm too thin-skinned. And like, well, just also if you invest 4 months in a cave by yourself into something,
exactly.
It's going to be hard to take criticism on your Mona Lisa there. So yeah. So what are elements? You're a master of this adult learning. And by the way, I looked at. Everybody should check out the site. I looked at it on LinkedIn for the. What was it? It was a promo page for the Sauder executive education. And actually, it's really cool. One of my colleagues is actually in your promo video. I don't know if she knows this.
Nice.
But I was like, and she's pretty selective. So,
okay.
So that's awesome. So I will interview her next.
There you go.
How did it go? Was it really good? So what are some elements do you think that take adult learning to the next level? And you talked about learner-centeredness. How does this fit, or does it?
Yeah. Oh, that's a big question.
I know.
I don't know let me know if I'm going off track here if I start rambling. Obviously, technology is taking us to the next level, and that's good.
Can you give me more detail about how you think technology is taking us to the next
level?
Well,
AR, VR, all this, the idea of being able to, even what we're doing now, for us to have a conversation where I see you, I see where you are, I see your environment. I can feel more connected to you by visually seeing you in this and hearing you. I read somewhere a while ago about the effect of TV. Now, we've had technology in education for a number of years. In the 60s, we had educational programming on TV, but there was a survey done when I think it was Kennedy, and I'm terrible with politics, but I can't remember. But Kennedy was running, and his opponent did his speech, or was talking, and it was on radio only, and Kennedy chose to be televised. And so the comments that came from the survey or the questionnaire were that people felt, obviously Kennedy was a young, good-looking guy, and so people tended to resonate with that, but they felt that he was able to reach them, and it was attributed to them seeing him. And so that whole idea of an environment where we can feel like we're with that person. We are, on the most part, I think we are social learners. We like to be able to talk to each other about what we're learning. And so as the technology allows us to do that in a more natural environment, so that it is not cumbersome, it's not difficult. It's, I realize it's been around for a while now. We've had some things like Skype and now Zoom and these sorts of things, but the less cumbersome they become to use, then the more we use them and the more they fit into our everyday environment. And so, there's not many people that you and I know that do not pick up a device of some sort throughout the day to either communicate or access information. So we need to be looking at how that is affecting us and how we're digesting things from those from that transmission, I guess, if you will. Mm-hmm. But then, you tie into that the big data. Now, not only do we can we access that information, but now it can give us information about how many are accessing it and what they're accessing and all that kind of stuff. So I think the elements and the way it's changing our learning is that we begin to see this, and from the learning and instructional design side, we begin to look at this data and we draw the patterns and the inferences from it. And we really start using it in a way that shapes our learning pieces and how we're going to produce those and what we can do differently the next time, if you will. I am I'm very interested in this idea of cognitive overload. What is it that, and so the idea that we know, and they are continuously learning more about how the brain works. I mean, that to me is exciting in itself, not just for the learning side of it, but for the health and medical side of it too. I mean, there's so much that we don't know, and the idea. So yeah, I don't know. Have I answered your question? Is that?
I think that you definitely have, especially brought up things like data, and I think that it's funny. A lot of people want more of it, but gathering things that are actually meaningful, that inform not only like your process but also the result of that process. That's hard, because most metrics are kind of arbitrary, like numbers of people who completed things, and is that a real valid measure of of effectiveness in some ways? Maybe you can correlate it.
Well, and I think that it takes it into that level, and the things that I know nothing about them. I know how to spell XAPI. I mean, I'm not. I know enough of it to know that I need to know more, and the same with things like blockchain. I mean, there's so much that we can start learning more about. So with a typical LMS, yes, you can tell when someone has accessed that asset or that piece of learning, but you really haven't determined much more than the fact that they opened it up. And so with the XAPI, and you can now go in and you can say, well, yeah, they opened it at this time, or they watched it at this point, and then they shut it down at this point. Okay, well, let's go back in and see, why did they shut it? What happened in those seconds that either was confusing or uninteresting, or just didn't hit the mark for all of these learners, because it's all happening in this. So that idea of being able to take that performance data and really apply it in learning is exciting as well.
I think when I talked to the Chris Tompkins, who is a part of the SCORM world. And he talked about how, with XAPI, you can, it's funny because a lot of people drop that and they really don't know the extent it takes to actually implement something that not only evaluates the learning, but also the performance is like, how do you do that, right? What systems? So for me, it's almost like the next level is going to be where the education pieces are working directly with business. So they talk to each other, so that you could see when you release somebody from your, like, say, business workshop, you can see the trends in their career progression, or right? Like these things fit in, then you'll get so much more input also into saying, okay, look at these people, now they need this. I can see this gap because they're all, this is
And that's where the demand is. I mean, people don't want to just take a course for the sake of taking a course. It's how are we applying this? Is it applicable? And is it applicable 6 months down the road as well?
Yeah.
So, it's all fascinating.
It is. It's
overwhelming too.
That's true too. And it actually terrifies me a little bit when people, you really like drop, you drop VR, AR, and I'm like, okay, if we're still, the thing that you mentioned about people making eye contact, that's actually, it's apparently proven that if you actually turn on the camera and people can see your eyes in your face, they trust you more, right?
Oh, is that right? Okay.
That's why I'm on, right?
Yeah, perfect.
So,
I trust you.
And you can trust you more. And also, if you're the person who does that, you have more influence. Right. So, but what's funny is that this is my modus operandi, but how many people still are not even turning on their cameras because they're camera shy, right? So then when you were like, okay, let's go to the VR and AR, and I'm like, okay, but we haven't figured out the WebEx yet.
Right.
Let's just get that right. I know I'm kind of traditional in that way, and I know that there's ways to optimize it, but it's almost like, what's the next best thing before we solidify this thing and maximize its use almost. Yeah.
Well, and maybe the point there is that there is no one size fits all. I mean, that's, we
Right.
do, we pick and choose, but in our field, the glory of it is that we have this environment where we can be creating choice. Yeah. And that's, again, going back to what gets me up in the morning. Well, how many ways can we produce this in a learner choice environment?
That's true. That's really cool. I didn't think about it that way. That's because maybe the person who is shy on camera would really do well in a VR environment because they're not themselves. Yeah. Right. Cool. Yeah. Thank you. See, that's why we're talking, because dropping knowledge.
We should do this more often.
Okay. So what do you say to people who are still skeptical of online learning and argue that face-to-face approach will always be more effective or preferred by the learner? Because people love workshops.
Okay, I get this all the time.
Do you?
Yeah. It's interesting. Well,
these are all questions that come from like people who subscribe. So it's
is that right? Okay. Yeah. And well, that really ties in. Let's segue now into this, because what we were talking about, there is no one size fits all. I believe, there's, well, heck, if I were on a diet of purely, potatoes, I think I'd get tired of that all the time too. So the idea that you're going into a learning environment, what does that mean? We are now in maybe we've been here for a while, but I think we're on the cusp, it's a big cusp of a change in the pedagogy, or the approach to how we learn. Obviously, it's somewhat driven by the technology and the access to the technology, but we're also realizing that that traditional style of learning, or that traditional approach to learning, is not the only option, or does not have to be the only option. And back to my days as an online learner, when it was fairly new and there were very few choices in terms of how we got that community sense within a class, if you will. One of the profs, I remember saying at one point, he said, you're sometimes at more of a distance in a lecture theater if you're sitting at the back of the lecture theater than you are, in a web-based or an online-based class. And I thought, yeah, that is so true. I remember in my undergrad, the last thing I wanted to do was be up close and personal with the prof. I wanted to be way in the back and just listen and pretend to listen. So there's what is distance, and how do we? I think we are wanting to develop a community in our learning, especially in adult learning. When you look at the community of inquiry model that Garrison and others did through Athabasca University, that to me, that resonates so well. It's a Venn diagram, and they're talking about the presence. Okay, so there's the instructor or facilitator presence, there's the cognitive presence, and generally, especially in an academic environment, we tend to do that well. We've got great cognitive based assets. We can throw readings at people and write things that tell what we want to do or what we want them to do. And then there's the instructor presence, or that idea of that still, that not necessarily the sage on the stage, but that person, that one who has all that knowledge that you want to glean from them. But what we're not doing well is the third diagram, which is the social presence. And so how do we as an instructional designer really work to ensure that there is that intersection of all three, the instructor presence, the cognitive presence, and then the social presence? And this is where I think technology is helping us, but from an instructional design approach, we also need to be designing that. All right, so you talked earlier about group work. Well, yes, we're not always good with groups because there isn't time, and somebody's got 3 kids at home, and another person has an incredibly busy job and they're traveling all over. So group work can be tough from a logistics point of view, but we are, as a designer, what's the purpose of the group work? What are we doing to enhance that social presence, that idea of we are people and then we are learners. And so being able to find the room in the course, if you will, to tell our stories, to share our stories, to do some peer-to-peer learning, and to really understand the social side of learning in a lot of these cases.
I actually never really considered your point, but I found that in the mostly academic courses, the content is still, that knowledge base is still priority, and the social is added as an engagement tactic.
Right.
But only if you leveraged it more heavily, you'd probably find everything gets improved, right?
Right.
Yeah,
right.
That's a great.
It's why a lot of people will say, they prefer a blended approach, or I want to. Sometimes designers will bookend their courses with a meet and then online work and then a wrap up face-to-face. So and that works. But again, it's not a one size fits all. It does depend on what is the purpose of this. What is it? What are the goals? What do we want to achieve from this? What do we want you to walk away with? And how do we best design that so that there is an applicable aspect to what we're learning? And so if it is a lynda.com course, which is great, and I'm a self-directed learner and I simply want to know the pieces of that and absorb it, then I will find time in my day. If I don't enjoy reading, if I'm not able to sit at a desk or in one spot for a period of time in one day, and then I'm going to have to find another option. So can I, as a designer, can I take that content and offer it in different ways?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I'm a huge proponent of that. My coin for it is multi-channel learning. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So, okay. All right. We're good on time. Okay, great. Okay. So what is your favorite resource for personal learning? You mentioned lynda.com. Do you use that service?
Yeah, not as much as I should.
It's a mix for me. But I find that they're more heavily now going into the soft skills, because it started out with that technical, right? So now there's leadership and all those things.
Yeah.
I'm interested to see where that'll go.
Yeah. That's an interesting point. And again, that's where, can you get the social side of it there are pieces of it that you can learn. I think, again, I look at learning now is a series of Lego blocks, really. I mean, I'm putting pieces on that, and I'm really looking at what I need in this period of time. And, how do I add to that, or what do I need to take off of that afterwards? Yeah. So what did you ask for? Resource?
Your favorite resource for personal learning. Where do you go?
Yeah, that's, I wish I took more time for personal learning. I'm really bad at back into learning. I scan all the blogs, of course. I loved the idea that people post things on LinkedIn, because when they're people I follow and admire, I go right to that article or right to that review of that book that they're talking about. I find now I'm not reading books as much as I'm reading blogs and online articles. Mm-hmm. So I go to ATD, Association for Training and Development, and the Institute for Performance and Learning, the Canadian version of that. And Learning Solutions magazine has always been a go-to for me.
Those are excellent publications.
Yeah. And so those are my go-tos. I do follow Stephen Downes. I don't know if you are aware of Stephen, but he curates a list of things, and you can go to his website, and he'll give some. He's got an incredible way of telling you right away whether you should read it or not, and the good and the bad, and sometimes the ugly about the research or the article. So I follow him fairly faithfully. You can do I think it's a weekly digest that I've opted for there, so that's been good. I tend to find that anything that is pushed at me too often, I'll unsubscribe. So but yeah, those are really the and people around me. I mean, heck, I'm at a university. I have access to resources like crazy. But it means taking the time, finding the time. But take someone out for coffee. Find out what they're reading. Find out what they're doing. Get on Zoom with a colleague and a friend, and find out what she's up to. So these are things you have to make time in your day. But yeah, you can do it.
Deliberate practice.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So what's a book that you initially dismissed, but then it really resonated with you later in life? This can be personal, or if you want.
Oh, I was going to say around e-learning or anything in life.
No, those are, I mean, there's some good books around e-learning, but.
Yeah, or not.
Yeah.
No. I learned, what was Patricia Smith, and I probably have it on my bookshelf here somewhere, the instructional design text that I had to, and I read it through for my course, and then years later I went back and I went, oh yeah, learning objectives, and I realized, oh, that's what they meant. Yeah, okay. So I didn't dismiss the book. It was, but a book that I dismissed,
or maybe just it. Sometimes you pick up things and then you're like,
I'll tell you about a book, and this is I've promoted this book so often. I should probably get some royalties from it, but
we'll work on that.
It's a book by Mary Catherine Bateson, who is the daughter of two anthropologists. I believe it's Margaret Mead and Gregory Bateson. Anyway, the book is called Peripheral Vision. And again, it's another one I read or was on the list during my master's. And I read it while I was living in Japan. And so in the book, just to give it a quick, Mary Catherine Bateson is an anthropologist, and she was writing about living in three different places and what was coming to her from the experience of living. And the one was Iran, of all places. The second was the Philippines, and of course the third was the US, where she was raised. And so she talked about some learning experiences that she'd had, and through all of those. And she talked about the peripheral vision. And so essentially she described it as issues and events and things that you need to deal with will circle around like a double helix. And so you imagine that. And as they pass by and in front of you, you determine or decide at that time if you are going to be able to deal with them or not. And if you can't, then they go out of your vision. But if you can, then it comes in. But these things will continuously circle, and they don't just go away. They do come back. And so it was interesting because I was working as an editor in Japan, and then I left Japan and I came back to Canada, and I was working as an editor for a different kind of publication. And one day I looked around and I went, oh, wait a minute, that managing editor that I had in Japan is suddenly here in Canada with me. Mm-hmm. They're both, they've got their idiosyncrasies and everything else. And then it just suddenly sunk in that, wait a minute, who's the common denominator here? That's me. And so it's all about, the issues are not where you are. They're part of, they're not about the environment. They are part of what you are involved in. So without trying to get too deep and philosophical here, I enjoyed the book because it allowed me to take a step back and say, what's the common denominator in a lot of these issues that are coming up? And it's not always as outward as we like to put it. It's sometimes inside, and we need to just take a different perspective on that. So
it's funny you say that, because there's people that are like, I'm in this industry is difficult, every single place I've been in.
Yes.
I was like,
Yes.
That's true. And it's kind of cool because you're talking about these different places, and sometimes I think we can just say, oh, it's the environment or it's the culture, so you have this thing you can blame.
Yes. Yeah.
That's kind of cool that you had that epiphany.
Well, but yes, it was something that granted, I had to move back and forth between Japan and Canada 3 times before it actually struck me as, oh, wait a minute, it could be me. What do you think? but that's learning experience, right?
That is a learning experience. So, and that's a fabulous lesson, but is there any other best or most impactful lesson that you've learned over your career that you were like, wow?
Well, without trying to sound like a broken record, again, that idea of being in a different culture, I think what struck me, and still I use it when I'm thinking about helping people to be more comfortable with learning design and online learning. I actually think it's a different culture. This world that we're in is a new culture, and so in many cases we are adapting to a new culture. And so I tend to look at it that way. When I first got into it as, oh, this is crazy. Oh, this is dumb. This isn't right. And again, that's how you are often when you go to a new culture. You look at what is wrong with the other culture, right? You look at it and you say, oh, how come they do it this way? And how come they, and then you take a step back and you begin to adapt to that culture. And then you start questioning and you say, oh, I wonder why they do it that way. Yeah. I wonder why me in my culture, I wonder why I do it this way, rather than looking at it from, my way is the right way. We're looking at, well, I wonder why this is done this way. And I find that with online learning is that, you really have to put yourself into a curious mode. And sometimes it just is the way it is. And sometimes you just have to accept that. And so it's about being in an intercultural mindset, I guess.
Yes. Wow. It's funny. I've been studying intercultural mindsets because of simply just working with the subject matter experts, but I never actually considered applying it to us.
Mm-hmm.
Interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
Well, sometimes works for me.
Yeah, but just I think that's just that aspect of empathy, humbleness.
That's it.
Perspective, and asking why are they doing it that way? There must be a reason. Mm-hmm. There's always a reason.
Or what were they thinking? It may not be a reason, but it's just, okay, let me think about why that perspective is being done that way. Yeah. And is my way, or the way that I think it should be done, is that really the best or the only way? So it's not about judging. It's about just looking at it and being empathetic and curious.
Yeah. Curious. I think you should get a t-shirt.
Still
curious.
I'm curious.
Okay, so if anybody wants to get in touch, learn more about your work, where should they go?
They can always reach me through LinkedIn. That's usually the place that I feel is the easiest. They can reach me at Sauder here, sauder.ubc.ca. First name dot last name.
Fabulous.
Yeah.
Oh, this was so awesome. Thank you so much.
Thank you. It was fun.
So good.